You're listening to the Mind Your Own Business podcast, aimed at helping photographers learn how to make the leap from amateur to pro. Hello and welcome to the Mind Your Own Business podcast, a joint effort brought to you by PhotoFocus and Skip Cohen University. This is Shamira Young, and I am joined by my awesome co-host, Skip Cohen.
Hey, it's
quite awesome.
What can I say? It's an awesome day in Florida. We're finally into that stretch where the natives stop complaining about all the snowbirds because they're gone now. So it's kind of quiet. And then in January, it gets crazy again as everybody tries to escape winter. And mostly neighbors of both yours and Myron's, because nobody wants to be in the snow and the cold.
I was going to say, yes.
So, yeah. Meanwhile, here's something I was thinking about this morning. You and I have been doing podcasts together for almost 5 years.
Man.
But I got to tell you, this new segment that we're doing now is definitely been one of the most fun. We've got Myron Fields in the house. He is an accomplished wedding photographer from the D.C., Baltimore area. But there's a section on his Meet Myron page that says it all. Quote, "I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce myself beyond what meets the eye. After all, that's where my love for photography stems. I'm a multicultural visionary. I've worked with all types of cultures, races, and religions. I don't discriminate. I'm a photojournalistic meets fine art and fashion photographer who specializes in wedding photographer engagements and portraiture. And if I had to pick one, I would say wedding photography is my favorite," close quote. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of where we're going to go today in the conversations. But here's one more reason why I am so excited about today's podcast. This is a sneak peek into the conversations we're going to be having with Myron and other guests on Monday, January 17th at Imaging USA. The Mind Your Own Business podcast is going to be live with a panel discussion about ways to build your business and essentially stop letting the outside world grind you down. So Myron and I hadn't met prior to my phone call, but I had to call him to set up today's podcast. And you're going to pick up, I think, on the same thing that I did, and I'm sure Shamira has already, just from a little conversation before we started today. It's his love for the craft. It's his love for the business and respect and love for his clients. So, Myron, this is the time for your lips to move. Welcome to Mind Your Own Business.
Skip, Shamira, thank you so much for this awesome opportunity. And what an intro. I'm like, wow, is that me? Did I say that?
Well, I will invoice you. I'll invoice you later.
Okay, I'm sure you will. Of course, it's said more eloquently than I sometimes would say. Nonetheless, I'm really, really grateful to have this opportunity to chat with you guys about something I'm so passionate about, that being photography.
Well, that comes out loud and clear in talking with you. It comes out loud and clear in looking at your website. It's clean. It's to the point. It's helpful. It's educational. You're answering so many questions that brides and grooms have haunting them in the background. And most of the time, those questions that haunt them the most aren't even real. They're urban myths of things that they've heard horror stories from other weddings or other brides, and then they get exploded, and suddenly everybody's got a story about how their photographer took so long on the family portraits that they missed their own reception, and that's all nonsense. So that's it.
Oh my.
Oh, the joy of family portraits. I just finished a wedding in San Francisco this past weekend, and family portraits were quite some fun, but we got through them, and we got through them rather quickly because the couple had some time to go back to the cocktail hour and enjoy a few drinks and food.
Myron, one of the things that really impresses me is not just your portfolio, which is just wonderful to see, all of your amazing work, but it's clear looking at your images that you really make every single engagement or wedding or portrait session that you do an experience and an enjoyable one. And I am really looking forward to just really digging into the nuts and bolts of your business. But I do want to make sure and get in our favorite question for our listeners who may or may not be familiar with you. Tell us about your background and how you got started doing what you're doing today.
My background. How much time do we have? I'll give you the I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. I grew up in Long Beach, California. Went to high school, went to college, took the business route. In high school, I started playing music. I played piano in high school, cello, tenor saxophone, and acoustic guitar. I still play piano now. My first year of college, I took the education route because I just knew I was going to be a music teacher. But then I realized that you have to have some patience for kids, and I realized that wasn't one of my strongest features. So I took the business route. So I worked in business management, project management. Eventually moved to San Francisco. From San Francisco here to DC, and yeah, let's see. I've been in the DC area for about 7 years, but more specifically as it relates to photography, during one of my trips back home to Long Beach, California, I was over at my grandparents' house, and this was roughly around 2014, 2015. I started perusing the living room where all the family portraits are, and I've seen these portraits for years and years and years and years. I mean, I can tell you the order of the portraits because I've had to dust the bookshelf where all the portraits were. Something about those portraits stuck out to me upon looking at them, and namely, I was looking at the portraits of my great grandparents. And as I was looking at those pictures this time, having seen them plenty of times before, like I said, but this time it was different. As I began to look at those pictures, I began to get a new confidence of who I was, what we could do, and just identity and culture. You have to keep in mind the backdrop of some of this it's the Mike Brown killing, Black Lives Matters, and a lot of things of racial injustice during that time. And so sometimes you are so inundated with all of the negativity going on that it can be this heavy yoke upon your shoulder. Sometimes you have to remind yourself where you came from. For me, when I look at those pictures of my great grandparents, number one, I have to understand that typically African Americans did not have portraits created of them, namely great great grandparents. So I understood that this was something totally different. But then I also consider the stories told me by my grandparents and my aunts and uncles and mom about their grandparents being my great grandparents. All of that stuck out to me and gained a new confidence. I was like, wow, like we have this type of confidence by just looking at a portrait. So I had an old digital camera that just sat around on my piano back home in DC, just collecting dust. So I picked it up and I started just photographing around DC, the typical things that people photograph. I remember a photo of mine that I was so proud of. It was a photo at the farmer's market where I photographed a bushel of green beans and cherry red tomatoes. I remember photographing ducks at the Lincoln Memorial. I remember photographing the Lincoln Memorial different times of day, night, sunrise, photographing long exposure trails. But it was the picking up the camera, it was just something I wanted to do for fun. But when I married the idea of creating portraits so that people gain confidence as I gained confidence in that moment, I started to really think about the power of portraits and portraiture being powerful. And so that really began my exploration into photographing people. That began my exploration into photographing anyone who would really sit in front of my camera, especially as a beginner.
Love it. Wow. Wow. Myron, I have to say that there's a theme I'm starting to pick up here. You mentioned the power behind portraits and just empowerment that any family can experience from having portraits that really reflect their legacy. That was kind of the word that was standing out to me, legacy, when you were talking about looking at, I think you said your great-grandparents or your grandparents' portraits on great-grandparents, and just what that means to have even had portraits back then, although they would certainly be different than today, but just that theme of legacy, that's priceless. And I think that's something that all photographers need to understand. A picture is more than just a picture. It's empowering. It's a legacy that we're really leaving for our clients.
Yeah, and another thing that I forgot to add is that there's a chronology on that bookshelf where there's pictures of my great-grandparents, and there's pictures of others, and there's pictures of my grandparents. And then when I consider my grandparents, who are still alive, God bless them, They're 89. My grandmother's 89. My grandfather's 90.
Mm.
We're talking people who have lived history that we read in textbooks.
Yes.
And sometimes those histories don't always align from the textbook to the oral history.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm glad to have both. I'm glad to have people who have sat through civil rights movements. I'm glad to have people who did not always get fair treatment, but they taught us to treat people fairly. And so it was those experiences that really shaped how I thought about portraiture and shaped how I think about portraits, because it's so powerful to see that type of legacy within just one image.
Wow, I'm sitting here very quiet because there is so much that you've said that explains so many different components on your website. For example, I'm right now on your Meet Myron page. And if I scroll down to the bottom section, I've got pre-shoot advice from M. Fields. And preserving your family's legacy through heirlooms is right dead center. The importance of considering a first look is on the left, and when to schedule maternity photos is on the right. And you've really taken what you just talked about in terms of appreciating all that family history and creating that and looking at that legacy, which Shamara hit on, and you've turned it into kind of a blueprint for your clients and potential clients to look at and understand. This is why photography and portraiture and storytelling and capturing those images is so damn important.
Yeah, very, very. Yeah. That's probably another reason why you don't see a lot of wedding detail photos on my website. Shoes, perfume. Honestly, none of that crap matters. When you're 80, you don't give a damn about the shoes you wore to your wedding because you probably can't wear them. But the person who was at your wedding, you'll want those photos.
Mm.
You want those faces. You want those expressions, which is something that I noticed throughout your website. You obviously, it's obvious that you've built relationships with each client because they're relaxed in front of your camera. You're not, nobody is stiff. They know why you're there, and there's definitely, it's just good stuff. I want to switch gears just for a second, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because I think we're headed in another good direction. But coming out of the pandemic, everybody is looking back and saying, wow, I survived. Sadly, there's some people that didn't. I'm talking about a business element, not the sadness of losing a family member or, death in the family or whatever crisis incurred. But just share a little bit about what happened to you when the pandemic hit, because as a wedding photographer, business certainly disappeared in the very beginning.
Business certainly disappeared. I was scared as hell, just like everyone else, because you didn't know what to do. There's no frame of reference on how to run a business in a global pandemic. Mm. I mean, yeah, can we look back at the Spanish flu and other things and study the historicity of those things? Yeah, but they still really don't relate when we do business in a totally different way. So let's just face it, just like many other people, I was scared. I'm a person of faith, so of course I prayed. I'm not going to say that prayer just takes all the fear away. Just lets me realize that my life, my business, my everything's not in my hands. It's in the hands of God. That is if you believe in a God. Mm-hmm. But it also gave me time to pause and to relax. Business sometimes can be a rat race where we're just running and doing things. After some time, the pandemic caused just some quietness, some peace. I remember opening the window one day and I could hear the walk sign. I live about a block away from the main intersection. And in the area, the intersection has an audio signal for those who are visually impaired. And I could hear that. And I typically on a busy day or any time, I would never be able to hear it. There was this quietness, there was this peace that was also in the time, during that time. I took advantage of that, and I really just began to hunker down on a few things business-wise, but also things as artistically. I have this thing that I'm constantly asking myself, and that is, what am I trying to say with this image? And so I really got a lot of time during that pandemic to just really sit down and say, what do I want to say with my images? What do I want to say to the onlooker with that image? What do I want to say on behalf of my client when I'm photographing images for them? So it was a time of inward and outward reflection, as well as time to focus in on my business.
I like that.
Wow.
I like that. That's and under normal circumstances pre-pandemic, I mean, as photographers, we're always rushing. We're always going. It
Always.
is so rare to have a moment to sit down and analyze your business or your images and refine those things. And so I love that you highlighted something positive you were able to do for your business. And I'm curious, was there anything you did to kind of keep in touch with your clients, or maybe those who had a wedding on hold or were trying to reschedule? Anything you did to kind of stay in front of them?
Be totally transparent. I don't know what the hell to do.
I love that. I love it.
No,
that's the boat we were in. Yeah.
We did not know what to do. Anyone who says otherwise is a liar. But, you know, of course, I started checking in with other peers who are photographers or creative entrepreneurs on different ways that they're doing things. One of the hugest things that's sometimes missing from photography is community. But I, understanding the power of community coming from a music background, I knew instantly that I wanted to be in community with people who are creatives, whose businesses and values and integrity aligned with mine. So I started reaching out to a few of my peers and just talking about what they're doing. And so emailing my clients, talking with my clients, text messages, phone calls. I remember, you know, before even understanding the severity of this pandemic, one client wedding was supposed to be, I think the first week of March or something. That's when the shutdown started. And so them not knowing what to do, but they wanted to be married, we met in this place called Malcolm X Park in Washington, D.C. And it was me, the officiant, and the couple. And I did everything from help the bride put her veil on to hold bags as they walked to another area so I could photograph some couples portraits of them. And
wow.
I tell you that was the most meaningful moment in business, because it really showed what this is about. I'm not here to be a rock star. I'm not here to be famous. I got in this business to serve people. And even if that meant in the midst of a global pandemic, I'm serving people. That's what we did. We served people.
You know, I did a project with Joe Busink way back when. In fact, we wrote a book together. And I remember Joe talking about the time he spent with his clients prior to just being transparent and open and let's talk about it. But that built up that trust so that on the day of the event, they were relaxed. I mean, by that point, he was a member of the family. He was an ally on a day when several photographers have said, common sense doesn't reign as king on the wedding day. I want to switch gears again. Sorry, everybody listening. There's no continuity to this conversation because there's so much here.
I love it.
There's so much here to be able to share about. Let's talk about prints versus digital files, which is something near and dear to my heart. I know Brian Caparici, when he works I don't know how many he's been to lately because they probably canceled a lot of them. But when he goes to a bridal fair, he'll have a booth and he will hand a bride a floppy disk, 5-inch floppy, and say, hey, take these home and take a look at my work. And they'll look at him like he's from outer space because half of them have never seen a floppy disk. They don't know what to do with it. And they'll look at him and they'll say, what am I going to do with this? And he'll say, exactly, that's my point. And then talk about the importance of printed images, of albums, of not relying on digital files to capture one of the most important days and stories in your life. And you brought that up on your website and talked about the importance of photographs. Where's that come from? Because it's great.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine if my grandparents had a floppy disk or not even in the 3.5 inch floppy. What's the floppy before that?
Oh, the big ones.
Yeah, I mean, just
Yeah.
imagine if those photos were on a floppy disk in a drawer tucked away somewhere, or even now, imagine if those photos were just sitting on a external hard drive somewhere. We don't see them.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, the reason we, I don't know, I just, for me, you need to print your photos. What's a photograph until it's printed? I have heard it said, I will soon find out as I get married in about 5 days, but I've heard it said that printed pictures and photo albums save marriages during times of heated fellowship, also known as disagreements. And whilst I'm not looking forward to them, let's just be real. We're human, and we'll have those times. When we look at these photos, it reminds us of things that matter. And like I said before, it's great to see where our money was spent on a wedding or on a maternity session, on the clothing or things like that. But really, what matters most are the people in those photos. Because I'll share a story. February, I had a maternity session at my studio in DC, and because of the pandemic, I'm kind of strict on how many people can come into my studio, and it was supposed to be just the couple and myself. Myself, obviously wearing a mask, having sanitized the studio. My client calls me about 30, 45 minutes prior, says, "Hey, Myron, my grandmother is here from Virginia Beach, and I don't want to leave her home. Could she come to the could she come to the maternity session?" I said, "Yeah, why not?" So her grandmother is at the maternity session with us, and she's a sweet lady, and I'm chatting with her, and in between my couple changing outfit, I asked if I could photograph her. So I immediately reached for my digital camera, and I photographed a few digitals of her, but I reached also for my Mamiya RV67, and I took a few portraits of her on some film, and she started talking about how she remembers film photography and things like that. And so we had a good conversation. And as a gift to my client, I gave them a few of the digitals I photographed of their grandmother. And then eventually, when I had that film developed, I sent it to them. But I didn't hear anything back from the client. And typically, my clients are ranting and raving about their images and things like that. Eventually, about maybe 7, 8 weeks later, I heard back from the client. And she told me that her grandmother went home about 2 days after the maternity session, and about 12 days thereafter, the client's grandmother had passed away. She contracted COVID and had congestive heart failure.
Oh my goodness.
Oh,
The client said, "I want to thank you for photographing my grandmother because she hadn't had any images created of her in about 40 years.
Oh my goodness.
So we used the images that you created of her for the obituary." I immediately went down to Pro Photo in DC camera store, and I had a 24 by 36 printed of the film image that I created of their grandmother and sent it to them as a gift.
Wow.
Chimera and
Right.
Skip, these portraits are important, and they don't deserve to just be on a hard drive. They need to be printed. They need to be where we can see them, so we can be reminded of those who love us, those who have nurtured us from infancy into adulthood, those who we spend our lives with, our time with, those who we're in community with. It's important that we print these memories.
Absolutely.
And to take it one step further, it also puts an incredible responsibility on all of you as artists to not compromise on the quality of those images, because you don't know what's going to happen. There's a great story that goes back, 25 years ago or so, from Lisa Jane, who's based out of Houston. And she told a story about photographing her very best friend ever from childhood, him and his little boy. She had a little fish pond in the back behind her studio, and they did the whole Tom Sawyer look with the bamboo poles, and they're fishing. And just a couple days later, both the father and the son, who she had photographed, were killed in a car accident. So she printed up a 30 by 40, whatever, a monster canvas print, framed it, and was getting on the plane. This is all pre 9/11. She was getting on the plane when the flight attendant said, "You cannot bring that on." She said, "Well, I'll put it next to the seat." And she said, "You can't. It won't fit in the overhead. It's not allowed." Well, the pilot heard the whole story. The pilot came out, took it from her, and said, I like to think that my job is important, but what you've done for the mother of this client that passed away is so much more important. I'll put it behind my seat. And he took it into the cockpit. And as she's telling the story to about, I don't know, we had about 80 people there that night at a Hasselblad University program, the tears are rolling down everybody's cheeks. Because I think as photographers, everybody so often forgets. You sit there and go, oh, that's good enough. I got it. And you just don't know what's going to happen. And you hit it. I mean, you hit it a few minutes ago, too, when you were talking about what if your grandparents had it on discs. I mean, as a musician, how often do you listen to your 8-track tapes anymore? How often do you have anything to even play them on? I've got a couple of cassettes here that I don't have anything I can play it on anymore. So it really makes a point on both the responsibility as the photographer and reminding your clients those family heirlooms.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went off on a tangent there. My apologies.
There's no tangent. It's just an organic conversation.
That's right.
And what a powerful one. Myron, I'm looking at your About page, and I love how you have some articles here titled Pre-Shoot Advice that you give to your clients. And as we sit here talking about the power behind a print and how it can leave a legacy, I'd love to hear a bit about your process, kind of the first steps in the process when someone contacts you saying they're interested in your services. How do you educate your clients? How do you correctly set their expectations, not just for getting prints of their work as opposed to digital files, but also just getting the most out of the experience? What are some of the first steps in that process of educating every client that you take?
Shamira, one of the things I've grown to understand is that I've got to make sure that I'm a good fit for the client. Mm-hmm. So whenever I have an inquiry, whilst I'm grateful that something about my work has resonated with that person, I've got to converse with that person and make sure I'm a good fit. So I don't just immediately, hop into Honeybook and shoot out a proposal with my rates. I pick up the phone and I call. Or I will ask when is a good time to call, and then we'll set a calendar to call. I want to talk to this person and get a good understanding of who they are, what they want, as well as them understand who I am, and make sure that what I offer is exactly what they need. From there, of course, we'll do the contractual things like that, retainers and all that stuff. But I let them know that I have this information on my website, but we'll send emails on whatever it is that they're being photographed for. So let's say it's a portrait session. I'll photograph them. I'll send them emails with what to wear, expectations. I like to jokingly say that my clients don't need to be models because in reality they don't. I find that sometimes people are nervous when you put this camera in front of them, as I am sometimes, and we think that we have to be somebody who we're not, when really you hired me to photograph who you are. So I instantly tell them to relax. I understand that I'll help them with anything from posing, give them suggestions on what to wear, things like that. But it's really important they understand me and I understand them, because that sets them at ease. And then we can really create some authentic portraits of them.
Years ago, the legendary Don Blair was asked, and this is in the middle of a workshop at one of the conferences, and he always had beautiful models in beautiful gowns. And somebody said, so what do you do when you have an ugly bride? And I've never seen a colder look in his eyes as he looked at the person that asked and said, you don't get it. There's no such thing. It is about, it's about that gleam that every bride hopefully has in her eyes. And if she doesn't have it, I love the way you're talking about, answering their questions and suggestions on what to wear. And there's always one bride that heard a story about the photographer showed up and the flowers didn't arrive yet. Well, if you know what you're doing, you don't need the flowers. So
very true.
This is good stuff.
Yes,
this is our conversation when we all get together live. This is going to be a kick. How in the world we're going to keep it to, I don't know, 75 or 90 minutes? That's going to be the challenge for the IUSA staff.
Oh, well, wow. Speaking of sticking to the time, we are almost out of time. That's crazy. Skip, did you have anything else that you wanted to ask, or did you want me to get to our favorite last question?
No, I do. We could easily go another hour here.
Yes, we could.
Let's hit our favorite last question, and then it's going to be, we're going to end this with a comma and restart the conversation on January 17th.
Love it. Love it. Let's do it. So, Myron, what advice do you have for photographers, wedding portrait photographers just starting out today? What would you tell them to do kind of as their first steps?
Social media has allowed me to have the opportunity to have this conversation with a few younger or newer photographers. And a lot of times I get asked about things like gear and the technicalities. And I'll answer the question, but that stuff doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. What lens I use, what camera, all that's secondary, doesn't matter. I guess I would really start by saying, what do you want to say with your images? So spending some time to find out, what do you want to say? What intrigues you? What is it that you want your images to say? That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is to get in community with people who don't view you as their competition, but view you as a fellow creative. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I know is huge that I would tell my younger self, or just a newer photographer, is understand the business aspect of photography, because I have found that photography conferences, the most popular classes are the ones who are talking about technique and artistry, but you've got to understand the business of this. And sometimes those are the classes that are the most with fewer attendees. So understand the business, get in community, and then just really focus on the artistry aspect of what it is you're trying to say with your images, what intrigues you. Yeah, those are three things that I would say to a newer photographer, and that I find myself frequently saying to newer photographers.
Love it. That's perfect advice. Perfect advice. And where can folks...
And the last one. Mm-hmm. Don't take yourself so seriously. know that you're going to... here's something I said to a newer photographer recently. I said to him, "You're lacking to do something is not fear, it's arrogance." And the reason why I call it arrogance is because you fear doing something because you fear the failure. And so that says that you're above failure, but you're new at this, and undoubtedly you're going to fail. So take the risk, put your ego aside, know that you're going to suck, just keep doing it. I mean, it's just the reality of the matter. We have to take 10,000 hours to master something. And so the reality is that we're constantly learning. But don't be afraid to suck.
Don't be afraid to suck. That should be a t-shirt. Oh, I like that. Oh my goodness. Myron, where can folks check out your work online?
Yeah, my website is mfieldsphotography.com. Instagram is mfieldsphotography as well.
Fantastic. We'll make sure to include that in the show notes. Skip, where can folks find you?
It's always the same answer. Everything I write is at skipcohenuniversity.com, and Skip Cohen on both Facebook and Twitter. And we always ask our audience, hey guys, if you've got anybody you'd like to have on a guest, if you'd like have us have as a guest, email us, or any topics you'd like to see us get into more at skip@mei500.com is my email address. And I always ask the same question back to you, Shamira, where they go to find you.
Yeah, they can send me an email at shamira@photofocus.com. That is my first name, CHAMIRA@photofocus.com. We love getting questions, ideas, feedback, because it really does shape how we move forward with this show. And Myron, we just want to thank you again. This has been awesome.
What a kick. You shared so much good insight. Just great stuff.
Thanks for the opportunity, you guys.
Absolutely. And we want to thank our listening audience for joining us as well. Please spread the word about this podcast, especially if you or your photography friends are really looking to bring your businesses up to the next level. We look forward to having you all with us next time on the Mind Your Own Business podcast, brought to you by Photo Focus and Skip Cohen University.